Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a stack of sources and, well, pull out the surprising, the essential, and the stuff that's just plain fascinating. Today, we're diving into a word that, let's be honest, often conjures images of chaos. Anarchism.
Yeah, that's the immediate reaction for a lot of people.
But as we sifted through your material, and there was a lot, from academic texts to these really powerful poetic manifestos, a much more nuanced picture emerged. Deeply human, actually.
That's absolutely right. Our goal today, really, is to get past those common misconceptions. We want to explore anarchism's core ideas, its incredible diversity historically and now, and crucially, how it links up with some modern thinking about radical self-organization and care.
Okay.
It's definitely a journey that challenges assumptions. It might just change how you think about cooperation, community, maybe even order itself.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The material you shared gives a really rich tapestry. We've got definitions, historical context, key figures, and it looks at both the peaceful side and, yes, the more militant expressions too.
It covers a lot of ground.
And here's where it gets really interesting for me. We're going to connect the sort of traditional anarchist ideas to the work of Wayne Sky Anderson. His writing isn't explicitly labeled anarchist, but wow, it embodies so many of those core principles.
It's a fascinating connection.
So what does all this mean for you, the listener, trying to navigate a world that often feels, well, let's face it, a bit chaotic? Let's dive in.
Let's do it.
So the very first thing the material had on is that biggest misconception. Anarchism just means chaos. Turns out it's often the opposite.
Right. It's striking how much the sources emphasize self-organization and voluntary cooperation as the roots. The idea presented is that humans might actually be, naturally cooperative rather than just violent or competitive.
And Emma Goldman's definition, which was in the notes, it just cuts right through. Anarchism isn't disorder. She called it the philosophy of a new social order based on liberty unrestricted by man-made law.
Exactly.
And she saw government itself as based on violence, making it wrong and harmful as well as unnecessary. Strong words.
Very strong. And it immediately brings up that question. Okay, if you don't have government, then what fills that space?
Right.
The anarchist view, according to these sources, is that governments with their hierarchies and tanks are basically inherently tyrannical. They impose order from the top down.
And historically, they kind of have a point, don't they? The material points out that people have organized themselves since long before states existed. States are like a really recent thing in the grand scheme of things. What was it, 5,000 years out of 300,000 years of human history?
Yeah, it's a blip. And anthropologist Davidgraeber, who's mentioned, suggests that daily life is full of anarchy.
How so?
Well, think about voluntarily waiting in line or joining a book club, helping a neighbor move. These are everyday examples of cooperation without anyone forcing us.
You don't usually think of waiting in line as anarchy.
Exactly. But it demonstrates that cooperative tendency. And the sources even talk about these glimpses of anarchy in crises.
Disasters or pandemics.
Right. When the usual systems break down, new forms of organizing emerge to meet people's needs without government oversight. Think about mutual aid groups during COVID.
Or the Italians singing on balconies, that kind of thing.
Yeah, spontaneous connection and support. It really makes you wonder how much order actually comes from us, bottom up.
Okay, so building on that questioning of structures, a really big theme in classical anarchism is rejecting private property. They see it as a foundation of state power and, well, exploitation.
Right. This is where you get Pierre-Joseph Proudhon's really famous line, property is theft.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
The argument is that private ownership, especially of things like land or the means of production, inevitably creates inequality. Proudhon argued, for instance, that the value of a factory comes from the collective work of everyone involved, not just the owner.
So it should be collectively owned.
That's the idea. And from that perspective, the state's main job isn't really public safety for everyone, but more about keeping the rich rich by protecting their property and wealth.
And this is where anarchism often gets tangled up with socialism in people's minds.
Yeah, the sources clarify that. They definitely share ground. Both believe economic exploitation hinders freedom. That's key.
But they diverge on the solution.
Exactly. Marxists generally aim for a worker-controlled government, a new kind of state. Anarchists, though, fundamentally believe it's impossible to have any form of centralizing power without economic exploitation. Any state is seen as inherently problematic.
So no state at all.
Right. The classical vision is abolishing the state and replacing it with free associations of workers. These self-governing communities would manage their own affairs, trade goods, cooperate with other regions. It's about self-governance at every level.
Got it. And it's clear this isn't just one single idea. The sources introduce several key thinkers, each adding their own sort of spin.
Definitely. You start with Proudhon, mid-19th century, setting the stage with property is theft. Then Mikhail Bakunin builds on that. He opposed hierarchies of all kinds, really pushed for collectivism, workers organizing themselves into groups, sharing resources, making decisions together.
And he wasn't afraid of confrontation.
No, he advocated challenging the state directly, even through violent revolution. That's a really important strand.
Then there's Peter Kropotkin.
Right, Kropotkin, an advocate of anarchist communism. He went further, arguing for each according to his need, not just each according to his labor.
How does that work?
His vision was based on mutual aid. Think of a public library. You don't have to prove you deserve a book. You just access it based on need. He imagined society running like that, completely distinct from state communism.
Interesting. And Emma Goldman, we mentioned her definition earlier.
Yeah, Goldman, the 20th century feminist revolutionary, she really hammered home the idea of thinking for yourself. Anarchism is all about thinking for yourself.
She sounded quite practical, too.
She argued it was impractical to just cling to a bad system and hope for change. We need to try new things. And, like Bakunin, she considered violence a justifiable means to an end in a revolutionary context.
Okay, so that covers some core ideas and figures. What does anarchism actually look like in practice? The sources show this massive spectrum, right? From peaceful stuff to, well, violence.
Absolutely. On the peaceful or maybe everyday side, you see things like mutual aid groups providing direct help in communities, food banks, skill shares, that sort of thing.
The Occupy movement fits here, too.
Yeah, Occupy was an attempt at politics distantly.
Yeah.
Explicitly rejecting central leadership.
Yeah.
And then there's Colin Ward's idea of everyday anarchism, just people helping each other out through simple gestures, talking to neighbors, volunteering.
Stuff we already do.
Exactly. The Zapatistas in Mexico are also mentioned, an autonomous community living out these ideals separate from the state.
Okay, but then there are groups that are more confrontational, even armed.
Right. You have groups like Redneck Revolt mentioned anti-capitalist, anti-racist, but also pro-gun rights, providing armed security, or RAH Red and anarchist skinheads, known for direct militant action against fascist groups.
So a defensive stance, but armed.
And then you get into groups primarily known for more aggressive tactics. Antifa, for example.
How do the sources describe Antifa?
As a decentralized network, using a mix of tactics: digital activism, doxing, harassment, vandalism, and physical violence, often using that black bloc tactic for anonymity and solidarity during confrontations.
They became prominent confronting far-right groups, but also faced criticism.
Yes, particularly around accusations of suppressing free speech through their confrontational methods.
But then there are specific named groups associated with violence?
Yeah, the sources list quite a few. Conspiracy of Fire Nuclei, SPF, and Greece bombings, arson. The Informal Anarchist Federation, FAI, from Italy, carrying out bomb campaigns internationally.
Historically?
Oh, yeah. The Gallianisti in the U.S., Italian anarchists who saw violence as necessary against capitalism. Narodnaya Volya in Russia, assassinating Tsar Alexander II as a propaganda of the deed.
Wow.
And others focusing on specific issues. Individualistas tendiendo a lo salvaje ITS, eco-anarchists promoting violence against modern civilization.
Yeah.
The Earth Liberation Front, ELF, using arson and sabotage against environmental destruction.
There are even more mentioned, aren't there? Wrote Zora in Germany, the Bono Gang in France, the Black Army in Russia, Los Solidarios in Spain.
Arditi del Popolo in Italy, the IWPA linked to Haymarket, the Invisible Committee in France. The list is long and diverse.
So clearly, anarchism covers a huge range of approaches and philosophies.
It really does. Which, naturally, leads to debates and challenges within anarchism itself.
Like the practicality question. Can a stateless society actually work?
Right, that's the big external critique. But Goldman's counter, again, was that sticking with a failing system is what's really impractical.
Makes sense. What about internal challenges?
Well, the lack of central authority, the very core of anarchism, can be a practical hurdle. Reaching consensus can be hard, groups can splinter, lose momentum. It's inherent in the structure.
And who gets to define what counts as anarchy?
That's a great point from the sources. No one litigates what counts, which means a really wide swath of political perspectives use the label. Sometimes, like with crypto-anarchists, it seems pretty far removed from the original collectivist roots.
And the biggest divide seems to be violence.
Absolutely. Whether it's okay or even necessary to use it, that's a fundamental tension.
Mm.
You have deeply pacifist anarchist traditions right alongside those who see violence as essential for revolution or self-defense.
Okay. Now, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about Wayne Sky Anderson's work, specifically the kinship revolution idea from We Are Us and The Beautiful Damned. It's not explicitly called anarchist, but the connections seem really strong.
They really are. His work starts with this profound critique of the current system, which echoes so many anarchist concerns. He writes, "This world was not built for the strange, the soft, the storm-born."
And that it's working exactly as designed to erase us.
Yeah, prioritizing compliance over contradiction, making invisibility profitable. It's a really sharp indictment of systems that demand conformity and marginalize difference.
So what's the response Anderson proposes? It's not fixing the system, right?
No, not at all. His work is very clear. We are not here to fix it. We are not here to beg for a place. We are here to build what it never dared imagine.
Wow.
The emphasis is on creation as refusal, creation as revolution, building something entirely new.
And it's inclusive.
Very much so. We are not a movement against the world. We are a movement for the ones it forgot. It's about gathering, not attacking.
And who is this we?
It's defined as all who were never meant to belong within the current system. The outliers, outsiders overlooked. The community forms organically, people who found each other in the static and chose freely to stand together.
Based
on safety, autonomy, and space to unfold. Very anarchist principles right there.
Mm.
Freedom, self-determination, mutual support, voluntary association.
Then there's this idea of kin with that.
Kin are those who go deeper within that community. They choose to take on risk and respond, not just to others in the immediate group, but to all who are part of us.
And their guiding principle?
No harm goes, unnoticed, unchallenged, unanswered. It's a commitment to active defense and mutual aid.
This reflex of kin.
Yeah, that's the core idea. When one of us is in need, wounded, silenced, erased, we respond. And importantly, it's defined as responsibility freely chosen, never imposed.
So not charity, not obligation.
Exactly. It's presented as a conscious choice, an act of solidarity meant to actively collapse the systems that profit from our separation by demonstrating a powerful alternative.
The works also outline specific commitments and practices.
Yes, 10 core commitments and practices of kin. They're very concrete. Things like responding to harm. We refuse to let harm pass unchallenged. Or honoring difference. Difference is not a flaw, it is the foundation.
And
huge emphasis. Respecting autonomy and consent. Consent is not optional, it is sacred. Also things like holding softness as strength, challenging traditional power dynamics.
what else stood out?
Protecting the right to rest. A direct pushback against relentless productivity culture. Choosing truth over comfort. Valuing authenticity. And not abandoning outliers. When someone drifts, we don't erase them, we reach. It's about maintaining connection even when it's difficult.
So these are very practical, everyday actions.
Absolutely. Showing up imperfectly, asking before acting, offering without imposing, disrupting harm, making repair, choosing presence. It feels like a blueprint for a different way of being together.
Yeah.
Radical, but lived.
And it all circles back to that core idea.
Yeah. We cannot rely on systems that were built to erase us. So you build something else from the ground up, providing the support the mainstream systems don't. It feels very much like that everyday anarchism concept in action.
Okay, now let's look at Anderson's other work mentioned, Drift Carefully. This sounds like it has a very different, much darker tone.
It really does. The subtitle alone, if you hear this transmission, it is already too late. Sets you up for something unsettling. It explores communication breakdown, isolation, almost the negative space that the Kinship Revolution tries to fill.
How does it portray this breakdown?
It talks about a collapse coming from within the signal itself, where a connection becomes memory, memory becomes burden, then drift, contagion, structure, hunger, and finally law. It's this slow, internal decay of meaning and relationship.
Like society rotting from the inside out.
Precisely. And the application section shows a character battling this dehumanizing bureaucracy. The Bureau, notice is signed, systemically yours. Constant access glitches. His reality just sort of shrinks with a cold, indifferent shrug from the system.
That sounds chillingly familiar, actually.
It is. He's asked to complete your application for connection and gets assigned a relational score, like a credit score for being human. And when he tries to genuinely connect, to find someone who will understand, the system just rejects it. Incompatible with current parameters.
He can't get through.
No. He reflects he can't remember ever feeling heard by the system. His application just sits there, under review, estimated weight, undetermined, stuck. It's bureaucratic indifference as a form of slow violence.
Then there's a hearing.
Yeah, but he's interrogated about an internal burden, the one you witnessed, the one you carry within you. And the voice tells him, we all blame someone. It does not free us. It merely shifts the burden. The judgment is revealed as internal, maybe self-inflicted, under systemic pressure.
Things get weirder in the reach section.
Much weirder. Reality unravels. Elevators go to non-existent floors, time loops. The building unlearns itself. He's desperately trying to document it, asking, do you remember when this made sense? But nobody else seems to notice.
That's terrifying, the isolation.
It is. And the disruption escalates impossible hallways, nonsensical speech from superiors. But even amidst this decay, there are these strange acts of creativity erupting in the chaos. A violinist in the server room, someone painting with melted plastic.
Little sparks of defiance.
Perhaps. He scratches out his official witness badge and writes remnant, claiming a different identity within the ruins.
But it ends darkly with the devouring.
Very darkly. A pervasive hum grows. Physical decay. Apathy. He encounters this terrifying shadow form, featureless, shimmering static, and ultimately he surrenders to the machine described as alive, hungry, organic, predatory, consuming him into numbness.
Wow, that's bleak.
It is incredibly bleak. Yet Anderson's afterword offers a sliver of hope, talking about transmissions in the hum, how even broken signals can be received. His bio mentions writing for the almost heard, people on the edges, living where meaning slips.
So even in that darkness, there's a reaching out.
Yeah, it suggests that even within total system failure, some form of connection or witness might still be possible for those attuned to it. It resonates with anyone feeling lost or unheard in complex systems.
Okay, so we've looked at historical anarchism and then Anderson's Kinship Revolution and the bleakness of drift carefully. How do we synthesize this? How does Anderson's vision, which avoids the label, really connect with anarchist principles?
It's a really rich connection, actually. His critique of this world demanding compliance and pathologizing difference directly mirrors anarchism's deep skepticism of authority and all hierarchies, state, corporate, but also racial, gender hierarchies.
Right, and the focus isn't reform, it's building something new.
Exactly. That emphasis on creation as the deeper defiance, building this garden of vivid existence instead of fixing the old world, that lines up perfectly with non-revolutionary anarchist traditions, like forming intentional communities outside state control.
And the kinship and mutual aid aspects.
That strongly echoes socialist anarchism, like Kropotkin or Proudhon, focusing on collective well-being and horizontal structures. He explicitly calls the community a constellation, not a chain of command. The reflex of kin is basically mutual aid formalized into a core principle.
What about violence, that key anarchist debate?
Anderson's work acknowledges the need for defense. We know how to fight. If you arrive as a threat, you be met like one. But the primary energy is care as defiance and creation as revolution. It feels more aligned with nonviolent resistance or civil disobedience traditions within anarchism, emphasizing building alternatives over direct destruction, though self-defense is clearly on the table.
And the rejection of external validation. No permission needed.
Yeah, that really resonates with anarchism's anti-foundationalism, the skepticism of any single ruling principle or authority.
Yeah.
It leads to this proliferation of possibilities where communities define their own reality and values. It's radical self-determination.
Okay. So, wrapping this up, what are the big takeaways? We dove into anarchism and found it's way more about self-organization, voluntary cooperation than just chaos.
Right. We saw the historical figures, the critiques of state power and private property, and that huge range of expressions from peaceful mutual aid all the way to militant action.
And then we connected it to Wayne Sky Anderson's Kinship Revolution, a contemporary vision that, even without the label, really embodies anarchist principles of care, defiant creation, building alternatives for the marginalized.
And we contrasted that with Drift carefully. His look at the kind of systemic breakdown and isolation that makes such alternatives feel necessary.
Ultimately, all these sources, historical and contemporary, they push us to question how society works, how power functions, how we connect or disconnect.
They show this enduring human drive for autonomy, for community, for mutual support, whether it's through huge revolutions or just those quiet, everyday acts of care.
So for you listening, if that description of a world maybe not built for you resonates, what happens if you stop trying to fit in, stop seeking acceptance from systems that might not value you?
Yeah, what does it really mean to shift from asking permission to just creating your own space? Maybe finding others who feel the same way.
Remember that line from Anderson? This is not a cry for inclusion, it is the declaration of a movement. If the world wasn't built for you, and you decide you don't need its permission, what would you start building?
It leaves us with a final thought, maybe a provocation. In this world, buzzing with systems and signals, what are the subtle hums we're missing? What are the real stakes of our connections, our disconnections? Who are you reaching? And who might be trying to reach you through the noise? Maybe Drift Carefully isn't just a story. Maybe it's a transmission we all need to tune into.
Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive. Keep exploring, keep diving.